I was watching a recent video analysis of the war in Ukraine, presented by a man who, seemingly holds every credential necessary to be the smartest person in the room.
Right.
He's a tenured professor and author for Cambridge University Press, and he's standing confidently in front of this big digital map. As he spoke about the recent Battle of Pokrovsk, the presentation was almost hypnotic. He drew these neat, decisive arrows, red moves here, blue counters there. It was incredibly satisfying to watch. He took all the chaotic violence of the front line and just reduced it to a clean game theoretic equation.
A simple input-output model.
Exactly. He argued that because Ukraine launched a counterattack, the reports of their manpower shortages must be exaggerated. It was just a perfect logical deduction on the surface.
What's that?
But as I watched him speak with that clinical ivory tower detachment, the reality of the situation just crashed against his clean lines. He wasn't describing the desperate gamble of a commander, throwing his last elite reserves into a meat grinder to stop a collapse. He was describing a bloodless move on a chessboard.
He removed the human cost, the desperation.
Completely. He treated the survival of a nation like a variable in a math problem.
Yeah.
And it was such a jarring disconnect. Here was a man with a PhD, 750,000 followers, looking at a firefighter brigade, rushing to a burning building and concluding that there must be no fire at all.
Wow.
That moment of realization where the neat model completely failed to map onto the messy human reality, it revealed the central flaw in his entire body of work. It made me realize that his lines on maps aren't clarifying the war, they are sanitizing it to the point of delusion.
That is a powerful and I think an essential observation about the limitations of these simplified models when you're confronting a complex reality.
Right.
When you reduce a dynamic clash of wills, which is driven by deep human context, historical motives, desperation, all of that, into a tidy cost-benefit puzzle, you fundamentally miscalibrate your analysis.
You lose the plot entirely.
You do. And that intellectual ivory tower detachment, this belief that you can solve a high-stakes geopolitical conflict using only basic theory, is exactly what sophisticated strategists avoid. And here's where it gets really interesting for us.
Okay.
This intellectual separation, this focus on the immediate rational move, is fundamentally alien to how China views strategy and governance. So today, we are going to conduct a deep dive into China's unique strategic and governance models, which fundamentally transcend these simplified Western assumptions by emphasizing historical context, collective objectives, and, well, the long game.
Okay, so let's unpack this core problem inherent in Western analysis. A lot of our strategic framework, particularly in conflict modeling and political science, it's heavily rooted in the concept of decisive, immediate action.
It absolutely is. It's all driven by the metaphor of chess.
Right, chess. The focus is on achieving checkmate or maximizing your resource gain within a static snapshot of time. When analysts look at a complex situation, they're often looking for the fastest, most rational path to victory now.
And that framework is profoundly inadequate when you're assessing a strategy that operates not over 5 months, but over 5 decades. If we want to understand China's strategic behavior, we have to look to the cultural and historical alternative that anchors its strategic thinking, Weiqi, which is more commonly known as Go.
The analogy is so essential because it completely redefines the goal of the game. If chess is all about kinetic destruction, removing the opponent's pieces, eliminating the king, what does the mindset of Waiki actually prioritize in a strategic context?
Well, in Weiqi, the goal is not immediate destruction at all. It's the accumulation of relative advantage over an almost infinite timeline. The objective is encirclement and the subtle shaping of the environment.
Shaping the environment.
Yes. You are seeking to gain and secure more contiguous territory influence than your opponent, accumulating these small, incremental structural advantages until the desired outcome becomes, well, inevitable. Think of it less as a battle and more as slowly weaving a net around your adversary.
While at the same time, you're strengthening your own connections and resources across the entire board.
Precisely. You're building your own internal strength as you shape the external environment.
That difference in mindset, it translates directly into statecraft. So if the Western model is optimizing to win the current battle decisively,
the Weiqi model is optimizing to win the inevitable war by ensuring the environment makes the opponent's position strategically untenable decades before the final move is even necessary.
Decades before, that's the key.
It is. This mindset isn't some fleeting political preference. It's a 5,000-year-old cultural imperative reflected in Chinese history and philosophy. It inherently prefers avoiding direct, immediate confrontation, which is unpredictable, it's resource-intensive, and it carries high risk.
Of course.
Until the moment when your accumulated structural advantages make the intended outcome a foregone conclusion. So strategy becomes about patience, about capacity building, and controlling the geopolitical choke points.
That's a fascinating application of a game principle to global affairs. For you, how does this strategic patience manifest in actual policy, beyond just the theory?
Oh, it manifests in the massive, sustained investment in long-horizon projects. When an analyst asks, why is China investing billions in infrastructure in these remote, low-return areas? A chess player sees only a massive short-term loss of capital.
Right, the immediate balance sheet looks terrible.
It looks awful. But a Weiqi strategist sees securing a critical piece of global infrastructure or a resource-rich sphere of influence. The long game means you're willing to absorb a decade of low returns now to ensure 3 decades of strategic security and influence later.
That makes the failure of those simplified Western models so much clearer. You mentioned the ivory tower detachment earlier. I recently heard this compelling anecdote from a high-level diplomatic forum that perfectly illustrated the flaw. There was a brilliant young Western analyst who presented a really complex model full of matrices, decision trees, the works. And it predicted immediate kinetic escalation in a specific area of the South China Sea.
Based on rational actor theory, so?
Exactly. Based on a rational calculation of immediate gain, his model pointed straight to military conflict.
And the diplomatic counterpoint.
Well, sitting across from him was an elder Chinese diplomat, and he didn't engage with the analyst's numbers or matrices at all. He simply told a story about his grandfather playing Waiki and how he would deliberately cede small corners of the board to establish these impenetrable lines across the center. He explained that the analyst's model was flawed because it only processed the data of that static moment. It was looking for a chess move. It completely missed the long-term cultural imperative that values enduring strategic advantage over an immediate tactical win.
That anecdote just perfectly captures the strategic chasm. China's decision-making isn't aimed at solving a localized, immediate equation for this quarter's results. It's about weaving a complex, century-long tapestry of national power and influence. If Western analysis fails to map onto this deep historical and cultural preference for systemic long-term shaping, it will consistently miss the true strategic vectors and mispredict outcomes.
It confuses strategic restraint with weakness.
Or strategic patience with indecision.
Exactly. So the fundamental takeaway here from this shift in perspective is that China views national power and strategy not as a series of short-term optimizations, but as holistic, systemic, decades-long projects. They aren't just optimizing for today's GDP number or tomorrow's tactical game. They're optimizing for a century of national progress, which, well, it requires a totally different framework for measurement.
It absolutely does.
Okay, so if the strategic thinking is long-term and holistic, operating under this Waiki mindset, they must have a way to quantify that progress. How does a nation measure the accumulation of this sprawling tapestry of advantage over decades?
They do. And this is where we have to introduce the key concept that drives this long-term assessment. Comprehensive national power, or CNP. Comprehensive national power, or Zhengeguoli. It's absolutely essential to understanding China's worldview and its strategic planning. It's a concept that emerged in contemporary Chinese political thought starting in the 1980s and was officially introduced into key national planning documents in 1992.
And it's a calculated measure, right? Not just a vague idea.
It's a calculated measure of the overall power of a nation-state, yes.
So how does it move beyond those traditional Western metrics, like, say, just GDP or military spending?
Well, those traditional metrics often rely on 1 or 2 hard variables, financial strength or military capacity. CNP is calculated numerically by combining dozens of specific quantitative indices across multiple dimensions to create a single, synthesized measure of national power.
A single number at the end of it all.
The 1995 definition makes this clear. It says CNP is the totality of a country's economic, military, and political power in a given period. And importantly, it signals the country's comprehensive development level and its position in the international system.
So that holistic approach, it acknowledges that real power is multidimensional and interconnected.
Exactly. And that fundamentally addresses the snapshot analysis flaw we were just talking about. If you only look at one variable like current debt load or troop numbers, you miss the systemic, long-term nature of capacity accumulation.
So CMP is trying to capture the whole board, not just one corner of it.
It's trying to capture the whole board. It draws inspiration from Western power assessment frameworks, but it dramatically expands the scope. And this is critical. It emphasizes the organizational capability of the state itself. The strategic national resources that constitute CNP are divided into 8 comprehensive categories.
Yeah, let's detail those 8 categories because they really reveal the breadth of this long-term ambition.
For sure. They are structured to cover every dimension of national strength. First, you have the foundational pillars, economic resources.
So GDP, industrial output, trade balance, the usual suspects.
The usual suspects, exactly. Then, natural resources, which covers land, energy, minerals, and critically, domestic self-sufficiency. And third, capital resources, which includes foreign exchange reserves, the domestic savings rate, and overall financial stability.
Okay, those first 3 are pretty standard measures of power, I think. But then we move into the knowledge and organizational sphere, which feels much more modern.
Yes, and this is where it gets really interesting. The 4th category is knowledge and technology resources. This is now a critical area encompassing R&D spending, patents, scientific publications, and self-reliance in cutting-edge industries.
And then the 5th one is what you mentioned before, the state's capacity.
Highly relevant to our discussion, yes.
Yeah.
Government resources. And this isn't just about the size of the bureaucracy. It's the state's organizational capacity, the ability to coordinate policy, to implement these massive, complex projects, and monitor performance across an immense and diverse nation. This institutional capacity is a crucial component for long-term resilience.
It feels like the secret sauce in a way, the ability to actually get things done.
It's a huge part of it. And then the final 3 categories cover interaction and influence. We have military resources, your traditional hard power elements of defense spending, troop quality, modernizing capabilities.
And international.
Right, international resources. So that's diplomatic reach, foreign policy influence, participation in multilateral bodies, strategic alliances, and finally, cultural resources.
Soft power stuff.
The soft power elements, exactly. Historical depth, social cohesion, and ideological pull.
So if they have all these variables, the core insight for us, for you listening, is understanding how they're weighted. Does every variable count equally, or does it change?
Absolutely not. And that's a key analytical point that's often missed. The weighting of these variables changes strategically over time, reflecting current national priorities and global challenges.
So it's dynamic.
It's very dynamic. Back in the 1990s, the weighting was often dominated by hard resources like military and economic output. The goal then was just catching up quickly.
Now, what about today? What gets the heaviest weight now?
Today, the weighting has dramatically shifted toward knowledge and technology resources and government resources. The priority is no longer just rapid economic growth, but achieving technological self-reliance and maintaining systemic stability.
So if the state is prioritizing, say, environmental compliance through its 5-year plans, then the efficiency and capacity of the government resources category to implement and monitor those targets inherently receives a higher weight in the overall CNP calculation for that period. It shows that power accumulation is a holistic process, balancing hard, soft, and most importantly, governance capacity across multiple decades. And that is absolutely essential to the Waiki long game.
Okay, so CNP defines what they measure, but what is the actual mechanism for executing that long-term plan and managing all those complex resources? That requires incredible organizational power, that institutional strength you mentioned. We need to look closely at the machinery behind the government resources category.
We do, and that is the 5-year planning system, or the FYP.
The FYP. The FYP system is, and this is no exaggeration, the core operational mechanism that coordinates, implements, and monitors policy across the vastness of the Chinese political and economic landscape.
Oh.
But it's far more flexible and adaptive than many people in the West realize.
Right, it's not simply some communist-era relic. It's an evolving system of governance.
Exactly. Since the early 1990s, it has fundamentally transformed from a rigid Soviet-style command economy tool into a highly dynamic political and policy institution.
So it's not a static blueprint written once every 5 years.
Not at all. It's better understood as an evolutionary, multi-stage process for systematically gathering information from the grassroots, from businesses, from research institutions, from local governments, analyzing that input to shape macro policy, coordinating implementation across dozens of ministries and local jurisdictions, and constantly monitoring the policy effectiveness of the officials who implement them.
Okay, tell us how this massive system translates high-level strategy into actionable policy across an immense nation of 1.4 billion people. It just sounds staggeringly complex.
It is, but it operates through a deeply structured, cascading approach. It starts high and flows down. The process begins with general guidelines or proposals from the CCT Central Committee.
And that sets the political tone?
It establishes the political and strategic consensus for the next half-decade, ensuring continuity. This then leads to the rough, maybe 100-page outline, which is approved by the National People's Congress. And that sets broad, often intentionally vague national objectives and priorities.
That outline is what gets all the international attention, but you're saying that's just the beginning. Where does the real work happen?
The real core lies in the subsequent cascade. This general outline triggers the production of hundreds of detailed subplans drafted by national ministries. So, for example, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology will have its own subplan for developing specific emerging technologies. And these then lead to thousands of specific work programs and implementation programs produced by provinces, cities, and counties. These local documents contain the practical details, the customized regional targets, and the resource allocation needed to realize the central objectives.
So it's a nested web of plans.
It's a nested web that ensures every region contributes to the national goal, but retains the flexibility to tailor the implementation to local conditions.
This sounds like a logistical and, frankly, a political nightmare to manage. How does the central government ensure that those thousands of localized implementation plans actually adhere to the national mandate? Especially if local governments have conflicting priorities, like, say, GDP growth versus environmental protection.
And that is where the institutional genius of the system lies. It creates a unique balance. Centralized political control, which sets the strategic direction, coupled with substantial devolution of policy-making authority to highly decentralized local governments.
So the central plan doesn't micromanage.
It doesn't. Instead, it reinforces tiered control through the political enforcement mechanism, the Cadre Management system, or nomenclatura.
Let's pause on nomenclatura. For you listening who follows this topic, we need to underscore that this isn't just a bureaucratic hiring system. It's the actual mechanism of power enforcement. How does the FYP leverage this political survival mechanism?
The nomenclatura is the system by which the party controls the appointment, promotion, and dismissal of all key official personnel across the government, the military, state-owned enterprises, everything.
Total control over career.
Total control. So when the FYP sets goals, they are formalized into two types: binding and predictive targets. The binding targets are the critical ones. They function as a veto over career advancement for leading local officials or cadres who do not meet them.
A veto. So if a cadre fails to meet a binding target, say a specific reduction in sulfur dioxide emissions, what happens?
Their political career is effectively stalled. It's over.
Wow. So the goals of the state become directly linked to the personal political survival of the officials responsible for implementation. That's an incredibly powerful incentive structure.
It is. It ties key national priorities like environmental protection, technological self-reliance, or poverty alleviation directly to the primary political enforcement mechanism. This system drove a dramatic shift away from a sole focus on GDP growth. For example, the 11th FYP formalized this division, and by the 12th FYP, which was 2011 to 2015, the number of binding targets had increased from 8 to 13.
And that shows a growing institutionalized emphasis on non-GDP goals like energy efficiency and social welfare.
Exactly.
What stands out here for me is the system's adaptive capacity. The targets aren't just static. They change to address pressing national concerns and to incorporate lessons learned.
The ability to adapt is fundamental to its resilience. The shift solidified in the 11th and 12th FYPs towards priorities like environmental protection shows this. Furthermore, the inherent time lag in implementation, the fact that the full web of specific localized subplans is often only fully completed and enforced in the latter half of the plan period, creates a crucial opportunity.
An opportunity for what?
For China's distinctive method of policy experimentation and pilot projects. Local governments and ministries are not paralyzed by the vague central outline. Instead, they are forced to improvise and test solutions on a smaller scale while the details are being finalized.
So they're basically running experiments.
These experiments often precede the final national plans, informing the subsequent details and allowing the system to adapt based on real-world results before rolling out a policy nationwide.
Can you give us a concrete example of this policy loop in action? How did a pilot project translate into a binding national target that actually worked?
Okay, a great example is the success in environmental compliance. The central government introduced binding restrictive targets for pollutants like sulfur dioxide, SO2, and chemical oxygen demand, COD, in the 11th plan.
Right.
However, when these targets were first introduced, officials often lacked the expertise and the capacity to measure them accurately or finance the compliance. So local governments were under huge pressure to fudge the numbers or just relocate polluting industries just outside their jurisdiction.
That's the exact risk of localized corruption we might predict in a system like that. So how did the FYP structure deal with that problem of evasion?
The central government recognized this localized evasion, and the solution was systemic, relying heavily on that government resources category of CNP we talked about. They didn't just punish, they provided solutions. They institutionalized advanced objective monitoring technologies, continuous emissions monitoring systems that were centrally controlled and very difficult to tamper with.
So they took away the ability to cheat.
They did. And crucially, they provided large central transfer payments to local governments to offset the costs of compliance, effectively compensating them for industrial restructuring losses.
It sounds like they learned a key lesson very quickly. Policy success requires capacity and resources, not just mandates.
Precisely. And the subsequent 13th FYP continued this trajectory, expanding binding environmental targets to highly complex issues like PM 2.5 and heavy metals, and further enhancing those monitoring systems, moving from localized testing to a national objective measurement infrastructure.
It's a process of continuous improvement.
It is. This continuous improvement, institutionalizing policy effectiveness and accountability, it showcases the profound strength and adaptive capacity of the planning system in tackling these complex generational issues. Coordinating this level of detailed objective policy across a continent-sized nation is an immense logistical feat that defies simplistic comparisons to standard Western bureaucracies.
Okay, so if the FYP provides the steering wheel and the regulatory oversight, we need to examine the economic engine that's driving this long-term machine. China's framework contrasts so sharply with the assumption that every successful economy has to be pure, unregulated capitalism. We're talking about the socialist market economy, or SME.
The socialist market economy, formally introduced in 1992, is China's unique blend. It is defined as a market economy, so it uses mechanisms like price discovery and competition, but it is fundamentally characterized by the predominance of public ownership and state-owned enterprises, or SOEs.
And the political justification for this hybrid system is crucial to understanding why it works the way it does, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The CCP frames it not as a contradiction, but as a necessary preliminary stage of developing socialism. It uses market forces as tools to advance material productive forces.
So the market is a tool, not the master.
Exactly. The ultimate political goal is common prosperity, and the argument is that a fully planned economy can only follow an exhaustive market phase that has successfully liberated productivity. This allows the state to utilize tools that, in other contexts, are seen as purely capitalist while maintaining ultimate political direction.
But how can a country with such a massive, vibrant private sector, I mean, it's the engine of job creation and growth, still claim to be fundamentally non-capitalist?
The rationale lies in the ultimate ownership structure and the party's unchallengeable control over strategic direction. China is deemed non-capitalist because the state retains a monopoly on all land ownership. It maintains primary ownership stakes, often through holding companies and strategic enterprises, and most importantly, the party retains ultimate political and ideological control over the country's economic direction.
So the market exists, but it operates within a cage, and the bars of that cage are controlled by the state.
That's a very good way to put it. Let's quantify the scale of the state's footprint. The state-owned enterprises are gigantic. In 2019, SOEs accounted for over 60% of China's total market capitalization.
60%.
And even more importantly, they are strategically clustered in the commanding heights of the economy. All of the major banking institutions, all the energy grids, primary transportation, telecommunications. So while the private sector contributes significantly more to employment, about 80% of urban jobs and growth, 60% of GDP, the state sector controls the financial pipelines and the critical infrastructure.
The current model is often termed party-state capitalism, which suggests that the state uses market mechanisms, but its underlying priority isn't really profit optimization. What is the core priority that supersedes purely developmental goals?
The core priority is the party's political survival and, critically, systemic risk management.
Risk management.
This mandate takes precedence over simple profit maximization or shareholder returns. The state views stability, social cohesion, and control over strategic inputs like data, energy, and key technology as more valuable than short-term GDP bumps.
This allows us to re-examine high-profile economic events through a different lens, not as market failures, but as policy decisions prioritizing that risk management. For instance, the large-scale restructuring of massive corporate debt, like the challenges faced by Evergrande.
Exactly. When a massive property developer like Evergrande faces collapse, a purely capitalist system would prioritize a clean bankruptcy and liquidation, regardless of the societal impact. The party state steps in not to save the shareholders, but to ensure that the immediate social contract is not broken.
So that's social stability first.
The government manages the situation to mitigate the severe social and political risk inherent in thousands of unfinished house units and the collapse of the financial confidence of millions of citizens. It becomes a governance issue, not just a financial one.
And we see this risk management logic applied to the massive tech sector as well, which has seen these sudden, sweeping regulatory clampdowns.
Absolutely. The regulatory clampdowns on the large tech platforms were not an anti-growth strategy. They were a systemic risk mitigation strategy aimed at controlling strategic direction and data security. The state aims to ensure that no single private entity accumulates too much decentralized financial or data power that could challenge central authority or compromise national interests.
It's the state ensuring that technological power serves the national plan, not the other way around.
Yes. This blurring of the public-private binary means private firms are expected to adhere to political fealty and follow state policy objectives, often participating directly in strategic national projects.
This model seems highly adaptable, specifically in its capacity to absorb economic shocks that might destabilize other systems.
That brings us right back to resilience. Western economic models, often based on assumptions of static labor mobility and free market correction, predicted total crippling collapse when certain Chinese regions faced severe industrial restructuring.
They predicted textbook Rust Belt scenarios, ghost cities, social chaos.
And those predictions were fundamentally wrong.
Why?
They were wrong because they missed the capacity of the robust governance framework. When faced with the severe structural shock of sunset industries failing, the party-state logic kicked in. It wasn't left to a slow, painful market correction. Instead, the central plan initiated a massive, coordinated, systemic mobilization of social and capital resources to pivot entire regions towards new industries like high-end manufacturing, green energy, or technology hubs.
A managed transition.
This demonstrated the system's unique capacity to absorb and redirect economic energy, proving that predictions based on simplified, static economic models fail to account for the highly coordinated and adaptable action of the party state.
Okay, so China's long-term strategy, guided by CNP and implemented through the FYP and the SME, isn't only focused on domestic resilience, it's projected outward into a global vision. If the Weiqi strategy seeks to shape the long-term environment globally, what is the diplomatic instrument they're using to achieve this?
This is where we need to look at the Global Governance Initiative, or GGI.
The GGI.
The Global Governance Initiative is China's comprehensive framework for actively reforming the international order. It is aimed at promoting a fairer, more representative, and more just global system, particularly for developing nations. This represents an active, proactive approach to shaping the international environment for the next century, which is entirely consistent with the Waiki strategy of accumulating global influence.
So what are the core principles underpinning the GGI that differentiate it from, the existing structures?
Well, the GGI is built on 5 core principles designed to reinforce existing global norms while pushing for greater equity. There's commitment to sovereign equality, upholding the international rule of law, promoting genuine multilateralism, adopting a people-centered approach to development, and focusing on real, tangible results rather than ideological preconditions.
And it explicitly presents itself as something that supports the UN Charter.
It does. China's massive investment and defense of the UN system seem absolutely central to this initiative's credibility.
In what way?
Well, China is the second largest contributor to both the UN's regular budget and its peacekeeping operations budgets. They actively participate in over 600 international conventions and are leading the implementation of the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
So they're deeply embedded in the system.
Deeply. This extensive participation demonstrates a commitment to multilateralism and the international rule of law. It really counters the notion that they seek to undermine the global framework. Rather, they seek to reshape it from within to be more inclusive.
The initiative places a heavy emphasis on collaboration and solidarity with the Global South. How is China operationalizing this focus on enhancing the influence of developing nations?
This is a primary focus area, and it's totally consistent with the GGI's aim for a fairer system. China actively promotes cooperation platforms like the expansion of high-quality BRICS plus cooperation, which significantly boosted the membership and influence of that bloc.
And the SKI, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Right. They've developed the SCO into the largest regional international organization by population and territory. This solidarity is geared toward enhancing the Global South's collective influence, its voice, and its representation within the global governance structure, ensuring that their concerns are not overlooked in discussions dominated by established powers.
And we see that through concrete institutional and financial contributions too, not just talk.
Correct. China was instrumental in establishing the BRICS New Development Bank, which provides an alternative multilateral financing mechanism to traditional Western-led institutions. They also supported the creation of an SKO development bank.
I remember they were also the first to back the African Union's entry into the G20.
A key diplomatic move. Being the first country to explicitly support the AU's entry into the G20, all of these actions through development financing and cooperation frameworks with Latin America, Arab states, and Pacific Island countries are concrete steps to strengthen cooperation and development across the Global South.
We've also seen China take on these unexpected proactive roles in peace and political settlement, areas traditionally dominated by Western powers.
Yes, and this demonstrates a willingness to engage in complex, intractable issues. China has explored unique approaches for political settlements, upholding principles of objectivity and fairness. The facilitation of the historic reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran is a prime example.
A huge diplomatic breakthrough.
A huge breakthrough achieved completely outside traditional channels. They have also played a constructive role in helping resolve border disputes, like between Cambodia and Thailand. This focus on mediation and diplomatic engagement rather than confrontation is reinforced by their establishment of the International Organization for Mediation with 32 other countries.
Providing a new mechanism for efficient dispute settlement.
Exactly.
And in the emerging domains of technology where global governance is still being defined, China is stepping forward to shape the rules of the game.
China recognizes that controlling the rules of the future is vital for long-term power accumulation. They are taking a lead in frontier governance by proposing the Global AI Governance Initiative.
And what's the explicit goal there?
The explicit goal is to ensure that AI develops in a way that is beneficial to human civilization, promoting mutual benefit and guarding against monopolization or misalignment. They are also actively contributing their frameworks and concepts to the UN's Global Digital Compact. This demonstrates a deep-seated intention to shape the global rules of emerging domains from a perspective that aligns with their long-term strategic interests.
This strategic depth in the GGI, it contrasts so sharply with a simplified transactional model of diplomacy. Let's return to the analogy we discussed earlier, the infrastructure investment anecdote, and make that contrast sharper for you, the listener.
Okay, let's do that. Think about large-scale infrastructure projects, say high-speed rail development in a developing nation. When traditional Western consortia arrive, they often come with binders full of political preconditions related to internal governance.
Right, demanding the recipient nation adopt specific political or economic models to secure the loan.
Exactly. It's a transaction based on suspicion. We will fund this if you change who you are. The partnership is conditional, demanding the recipient fit into a rigid, universalist governance box.
And the Chinese approach under the GGI framework.
It is about reliability, non-interference, and a shared destiny. China offers a technical blueprint, a financing package, and a handshake, focusing purely on delivery and long-term economic integration. They respect the local way of doing things.
They treat developing nations not as junior partners who need a lecture on governance,
but as sovereign equals who are part of a more equitable order, and you can see the results. Contrast the failure of certain U.S.-backed regional energy projects, which stalled due to ever-changing political demands, with the successful rapid deployment of high-speed rail networks in places like Southeast Asia, funded and built by Chinese consortia. The focus is on building the physical and diplomatic infrastructure under a multilateral framework that serves collective interests.
Accumulating influence through perceived reliability and shared destiny.
Which is the definition of Weiqi in action.
So, to synthesize our whole discussion.
I think you can see that China's strategic success and its resilience are not the result of a single brilliant tactical move or a quick market fix. They reside in the institutional capacity of its governance system to manage massive complexity and maintain decades-long continuity.
The 5-year planning system allows them to coordinate these vast, decades-long policy projects.
And link national objectives directly to the political enforcement mechanism via the nomenclatura. Then, the socialist market economy provides the engine, ensuring market forces are utilized to advance productive capability while maintaining political control over strategic sectors.
Which allows the system to absorb severe economic and social shocks and pivot entire regions when necessary, prioritizing systemic risk mitigation over short-term market efficiency.
And this resilient institutional capacity extends globally through the Global Governance Initiative, which seeks to shape the international environment for the long term. It achieves this through active multilateral engagement, development financing, and promoting a fairer system for the global south.
So it's about turning global challenges into opportunities for growth and global leadership.
Absolutely. The fundamental failure of that simplified ivory tower model is its inability to grasp deep historical context and the profound resilience of a system organized around collective, long-term national objectives. Understanding China requires moving beyond the static snapshot of chess. You must appreciate the depth of its Waiki strategy, a strategy of gradual encirclement and systemic advantage achieved through consistent, decades-long institutional design and unwavering commitment to managing all facets of comprehensive national power simultaneously. This capacity to design institutions that manage extreme complexity and maintain strategic continuity over vast cycles is the defining feature of China's approach to national power and global engagement.